snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, and I am joined by our staff writer and second-in-command, Ben McKee. He's, of course, here part of the RTI team. He's also the co-host and producer of the Swain Event morning radio show. You can hear that every morning from 7 to 10 a.m. on Swain's app, on YouTube TV and stuff like that, or I guess Swain Event TV, on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook Live and everything like that. So be sure to check it out. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the RTI Podcast. You can find us everywhere podcasts are found. We're on Android devices. We're on Apple Podcasts. You can find us anywhere and find us on our website, RockyTopInsider.com. Our YouTube channel is where a lot of you listen to the podcast and interact and leave comments and stuff, so we really appreciate that as well. And we are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, just Rocky Top Insider on all of those. But it's been a little bit since we've talked. I know last time we did a podcast, I mentioned we were trying to get a more regular schedule, but things keep dragging out in the off season, and we still don't really have an idea of what the 2020 season is going to look like. We don't really know even if fall camp's going to start on time. It's supposed to be sometime in the early part of August is when it's supposed to start, but with everything kind of up in the air still right now about what the season's going to look like, when it's going to start and everything, I mean, that's obviously subject to change. But we have had some roster news for Tennessee's football team since you and I last spoke, and pretty significant news on a Friday this past week for two key guys who are projected to be starters for Tennessee. And we have a couple other ones, I think, since last time we spoke too. But the two most recent things were, of course, Austin Pope going to Twitter and saying that he had to have another surgery on his back for another herniated disc. I hate that for him. He's had tons of just nagging injuries and stuff ever since he came to Tennessee. This is the second time he's had a disc problem, I think, in his back. I think it's the other disc he previously had an issue with, and now it's this one. So he didn't provide any sort of timetable for how long he'll be out, but he's not going to be, if fall camp starts on time, he's not going to be ready for fall camp. I don't think he'll be ready for the start of the season if it's on time in September 5th. I don't even know, will he miss the whole season? I don't know. To me, it's a blow because he was going to be Tennessee's starting tight end. He had the most experience. He's a really good blocker, and he's not maybe amazing as a pass catcher, but he was excellent as a run blocker. You've talked about that multiple times in different pieces you've written for our site, Ben, that he was Tennessee's best blocking tight end last year, and he was a huge part of why Tennessee was able to kind of pick up steam as the season went along with the run game. And then obviously the offensive line got better, but Pope was a huge part of that line last year and helping out as an extra blocker a lot of times. But then, of course, the bigger news that happened later that day, I believe it was Friday. It might have been Thursday when this happened. I don't recall now. I know it was late in the week when it happened. The news of Emmett Gooden being dismissed from the team after he reportedly hit a woman upside the head with a glass jar candle. She had to be taken to UT Medical Center and had to have sutures put in her head, left side of her face. And Gooden was immediately dismissed. So, I mean, I got to give, I guess it's an easy decision to make, but still we give props to Jeremy Pruitt for, just no nonsense, just kicking him off. It didn't matter that Gooden was, projected as a starter. He's gone off the team, and I was very mad when I first saw that news because it's a zero tolerance thing. You never, ever, 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 ever assault a woman as a man, especially if you're a person like Emmett Gooden, who is 6'3", almost 300 pounds, a huge human being, and he did that. I mean, that is just inexcusable. So he's off the team now. A guy who Tennessee didn't play with last year any, because he obviously injured himself or had an injury in fall camp and missed the whole season, and he only played 1 year at Tennessee, had that injury, and then now he's off the team. Those aren't the only moves, though. Obviously, Pope is still on the team as a scholarship player. He's not kicked off or didn't leave. But you have had two other players go in the transfer portal since we last spoke. One of them was Tim Jordan, running back, who is probably going to be second string at best, but likely a third stringer for Tennessee this year, considering Eric Gray is probably going to be the starter, and Ty Chandler is most likely going to be his backup. But still, Jordan figured to be a guy who could be a valuable depth piece. But now he's in the transfer portal after his arrest earlier this offseason with gun and possession charges, and he's transferring or trying to transfer into Western Kentucky. But Ben, I'll let you kind of update that if you want to, because it's it's an interesting situation for him in Western Kentucky. But he's transferred off the roster. And then Brendan Davis, who is part of Jeremy Pruitt's initial signing class in the 2018 class, a 3-star defensive back out of Louisiana. He is in the transfer portal. He announced that over the weekend that he is going to be transferring away from Tennessee. So that leaves right there 3 scholarship spots now opened up, 3 roster spots opened up. Austin Pope's spot is now open, essentially, not as a scholarship spot, but his starting spot's open. Ben, before we kind of get into a deeper discussion of Tennessee's roster and stuff here, I'll let you share kind of the latest with Tim Jordan and kind of your thoughts overall on this. And to me, I was pretty shocked with Emmett Gooden stuff. None of the other stuff's about shocking. Pope's had injuries. That didn't surprise me a ton. It didn't surprise me Tim Jordan transferred after his arrest, and obviously Brandon Davis didn't either, because I don't think he was going to see the field much at all. So those weren't surprising. The Emmett Gooden stuff, that was shocking and appalling to me. So you give your thoughts on that, talk about what's going on with Tim Jordan, and then we'll kind of go into a deeper discussion about Tennessee's roster.
Yeah, just a really unfortunate situation with Emmett Gooden. As you mentioned, there's just a zero tolerance policy for what he did. It's pretty cut and dry. He doesn't deserve to be on the football team, which leads into the conversation of, okay, what does that mean for Tennessee? And like you mentioned, we will get into that in just a moment. But you just really question the decision making of Emmett Gooden. And this is a guy that committed to Arkansas out of high school, could not sign with Arkansas because of grades, had to go to East Mississippi Community. No, he went to Independence Community College. And his journey was detailed on Last Chance U, and that's really where he's known nationally from, is being on the Last Chance U Netflix documentary show, because they did detail his journey to Independence and kind of his road after Independence. But he has to go to junior college, and then he gets to Tennessee, plays well in his first year, and then heading into his senior year, he tears an ACL and rehabs all year long. And then 3.5 weeks before fall camp is set to begin, he gets arrested for smashing a glass jar over his girlfriend's head. I mean, what are you doing? I mean, it's just common sense, a lack of common sense in regards to Emmett Gooden. And first and foremost, you want to make sure the female is okay. But then, I do believe in grace, and I hate that Emmett Gooden has squandered this opportunity, and that opportunity being a chance to be the starter on a good SEC defense along the defensive line, anchor a defensive line along with Aubrey Solomon, and potentially position himself to go make money in the NFL. I don't know if he would have been a draft pick, but he at least would have signed an undrafted free agent deal. But now football is completely out of the picture for Emmett Gooden. So it's just a really sad and unfortunate situation all the way around. And what does it mean for Tennessee football is the least important question
yes.
that we need to have as a discussion. But obviously that's what we do. And honestly, it's not a great development for Tennessee, but it's a development, it's a situation that isn't going to just completely handcuff Tennessee in the first place. I mean, Tennessee, with the same exact defensive line as last year, navigated the waters decently without him, and they should only take a step forward this year. And they have guys that can fill in for him, multiple guys, whether it be a Karat Garland, a Greg Emerson, maybe Elijah Simmons is ready to make an impression as a redshirt freshman. And then you do have 2 true freshmen coming in at that tackle position, and Dominic Bailey and Omari Thomas. who could potentially make some things happen despite just now stepping foot on campus. And you do still have Savion Williams, the junior college transfer, who was not very productive last year, but who knows? Maybe it clicks for him in fall camp this fall, and he's able to produce as a senior. So an unfortunate situation, but a situation that Tennessee can overcome. And then Brandon Davis is I mean, it's a transfer, but it's not a transfer that is going to hurt Tennessee. I mean, he wasn't on the 3 deep here at Tennessee, and he had been recruited over so many times the past couple of years that he wasn't going to be a factor. And quite frankly, it was a good transfer for Tennessee because it opens up a roster spot. Tennessee needed to get under the roster limit. They were over it by 2 or 3 spots, and now they should be right at it or one under where they need to be. So in a way, that was a good thing for Tennessee because now they're able to get to that number that they need to be at from a roster standpoint. And then, Austin Pope, that's really in my opinion, the biggest loss for Tennessee. He's not the most talented loss. Emmett Gooden is more talented than Austin Pope. But Austin Pope, in my opinion, is more important to this football team than Emmett Gooden was. And that is because the lack of depth and talent at the tight end position. Austin Pope was the only thing that you knew about the tight end position. You know the names at the tight end position: Sean Brown, Jackson Lowe, Jacob Warren, Princeton Fant, along with some other guys. But you knew Austin Pope was going to be the starter. And he was going to be very effective in the running game, and then hopefully Jim Chaney can scheme around the tight end position being productive from a pass-catching standpoint, because I just did not see that happening. I would have been surprised if Austin Pope caught 20 passes this year, honestly, or if any tight end catches 20 passes, because I don't think there's going to be a huge emphasis on the tight end position outside of run blocking. But that run blocking was so critical to this team because Austin Pope was very good at it. Say what you will about him as a pass catcher, but his strength was run blocking, and he was tremendous at that over the last couple of seasons. And now you're going to be relying on, Princeton Fant, who is more of a tweener, a guy who has bounced around from position to position, and then 2 redshirt freshmen, Jackson Lowe and Sean Brown, who really didn't make any waves last season, which not the end-all, be-all, but does make me question whether or not they'll be ready to play this year. So I think the Austin Pope injury is more hurtful, impactful than the Emmett Gooden one, the Emmett Gooden dismissal, because at least at the defensive line, you have all those guys that I listed off that can reasonably fill in. I mean, they did so last year, and they were young, but they showed signs of promise. And I think they will only continue to take another step forward this offseason and throughout fall camp, and will only be even more productive this year. And we don't know how long Austin Pope is going to be out. He did not specify. He did not say he was going to be out for the year. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound like he'll be back anytime soon. I mean, it's his second hernia in his back in the last 3 years, I believe. My dad had a sports hernia in his back, and granted, he was much older when he had the surgery, but it still bothers him to this day, like 15 years later. He can't go out for a round of golf and get to the back 9 without his back hurting solely because of that injury. And again, Austin Pope is much younger, but still, 2 of those surgeries within the span of 3 or 4 years, amongst other injuries, that is very concerning. So, yes, Austin Pope may actually play this year, but how effective he will be is a serious question, and whether or not he can even get on the field is another question. So I think the Austin Pope injury hurts Tennessee more than the Emmett Gooden dismissal. And then with Tim Jordan, he just another case of questioning the decision making. I mean, we're in quarantine, and everybody knows the details of him driving around with a loaded gun and weed in his car during a quarantine. I mean, what are you doing? I mean, it's just a lack of common sense there as well. And Tim Jordan was able to receive a lesser charge, and some of the details that came out of court said that he could, attend Western Kentucky and play football as long as he gave an itinerary to his probation officer. But then Western Kentucky, when reached out to for a comment by, I believe, Mike Wilson of the Knoxville News Sentinel, Western Kentucky said that no, he's not going to be playing football for us. So that's just another unfortunate situation like Emmett Gooden, where just a lack of common sense is going to prevent two productive college football players from playing college football this fall. And you hate it for the young men, but from Tennessee's standpoint, you can overcome the loss of those two, and it helps you get under the roster limit. So, yes, you would maybe in an ideal world they would be on the football team, but I don't see a difference in Tennessee's win total with them or without them.
Yeah, the Tim Jordan thing is interesting. That to me is, I don't really know what to make of it. He doesn't have, I think you all touched on it on the Swain event last week, he doesn't have the talent to kind of outweigh his baggage. And but it's also very telling to me that, this isn't just some random school he's transferring to. It's for Tyson Helton, who is former Tennessee offensive coordinator, who, coached him at Tennessee for a season. He's the head coach over at Western Kentucky, and the fact that he's, hesitant to bring him on, I'm not saying that, Tim Jordan's untouchable. It's just, it to me, it's very telling that not even, Tyson Helton is kind of willing to 100% have him on. And maybe he gets onto the football team eventually. I don't know. But that's that is very interesting to me as well. And to me, good, you were right there, Ben. I wanted to go back really quickly before we go back to more football talk. You're 100% right that the discussion of how does this affect Tennessee and football is probably the least important conversation to have around this this whole topic, because obviously domestic violence, aggravated assault, none of that's acceptable. I know when I first heard the news, I was so mad that I thought, put Gooden in jail and throw away the key. But I've since, you talked about having grace and stuff. I've since kind of, thought about it, and I still think he obviously deserves punishment. He needs to, answer for the crime he committed against that woman. But also, if he's willing, if he does something like that, if anyone does something like that, assaults a woman, especially with a glass jar like that, they need some sort of help. I hope Emmett Gooden gets the help that he needs, and I hope that he can, rehabilitate himself and, end up being a productive member of society somehow. Whether it's, and I don't think it's going to be in football as a player, but maybe it's as a, you look at what Rachel Barbeau does. She goes and talks to people, to football teams and stuff, and talks about, being, as she calls them, being kings, and to the women athletes being queens, and trying to change the narrative, and if you have made mistakes, resetting your life and moving forward. And this is a huge mistake that Emmett Gooden made, and not going to overlook it. That this is something that he definitely deserves to answer for. But I do hope, obviously, that the family of the woman and that she herself can get help, because this isn't just a physical trauma. This is going to be an emotional trauma for her. That's something that she's going to have to work through for the rest of her life, and the family too. So I hope they get the help they need, and I hope Emmett Gooden can kind of get the help that he obviously needs, and hopefully everyone in the situation, while this is definitely obviously tragic, I hope everyone moving forward in the coming, months, years, or whatever, I hope they all can get the help they need and ultimately move on and heal from all of this. But Ben, to go now back to the football conversation on the RTI podcast here, you mentioned it already. I look at Tennessee's defensive line without Emmett Gooden, and it isn't any different than what they had last year. And in fact, even without Gooden, I don't know that losing him obviously hurts, because he's going to be a guy who he has a lot of talent, and he showed that in his first year at Tennessee. He was a very productive member of that defensive line. Wasn't a full-time starter, because you had his first year here is when you had Shai Tuttle, Alexis Johnson, and Kyle Phillips. So he didn't start. He started, I think, one game, but he played all the other games, and he was very effective as kind of that fourth guy and a really good rotational guy for Tennessee's defensive line. And he was, I thought, would be a really good starter last year. Obviously, has the season-ending injury in fall camp. And it took Tennessee a bit. The defensive line had a slow start, but by the time the season was over, that defensive line, wasn't bad at all. You look at some of the guys who were making impacts. You mentioned Greg Emerson. I thought Matthew Butler did a much better job than I thought he was going to. Darrell Middleton and Aubrey Solomon had kind of a somewhat up and down season, but for the most part, Middleton finally came on strong at the end. Solomon, once he got healthy, played a lot better. John Mincy played a pretty big role. You mentioned Carrot Garland playing a role, and I think he could have an even bigger role this year. Jaquan Blakely played a pretty decent role, and I'll be interested to see him as a redshirt senior, kind of what he can do. Latrell Bumpus had a bigger impact than I expected him to as well, as an edge rusher type of guy. There's a lot of potential there, and a lot of those guys that I mentioned, in fact, I think all the guys I just mentioned are seniors on this team this year. It's a very, well, except for John Mincy, he's a junior. But everyone else is a senior or redshirt senior. So it's a very veteran-heavy group. And they were, they experienced from a number of years in college from last year, but from an actual playing perspective, they weren't. But this is essentially the same defensive line, that you had last season without Emmett Gooden. And, as you said, you add in a few more young, talented players like Amari Thomas, like Dominic Bailey, and you get an extra year of development for these guys like Elijah Simmons. If Kingston Harris stays on the defensive line, I don't know. He might go to offensive line. But with Carrot Garland, with Greg Emerson, getting them another year, obviously of experience on the field, but also just experience in the weight room, experience of dissecting the defense, experience of, hey, this is, I know what playing in the SEC is like now. I know more what to expect. I don't think Tennessee's defensive line is going to have, missing Gooden's going to, not going to be good for Tennessee, but I don't think it's, as you said, I don't think it's something they can't overcome. That it's it's not viewed as big of a loss as last year when he was out for the season in fall camp. That was a huge blow to a relatively inexperienced line from a playing time perspective last year. That was a big question of, well, who's going to step up? This makes even a bigger need for Aubrey Solomon to get immediately eligible, because at that point he hadn't been cleared yet from the NCAA. This year, I don't think Tennessee needs to go out and look for a grad transfer or someone to come in and fill that spot, or to try to come in and bring in more bodies. I think depth-wise, Tennessee should be okay on the defensive line. However, Ben, you mentioned tight end there. Without Austin Pope for don't know how long he's going to be out. I don't think he'll be out for the whole season, but if he misses enough of the season, especially if he gets shortened, does he try to get a medical red shirt, because he already has one red shirt under his belt, but does he try to get a medical red shirt and come out, do what Brandon Kennedy does and come back for a sixth season? But if he, even if he is healthy enough to play at some point this year, Tennessee's tight end position, you and I have talked about this, I think, on the podcast. I know we've talked about it in the mailbag and stuff before too. Besides, obviously, quarterback, because that's, going to be the biggest question mark for any team that doesn't have a designated kind of star at the position. Besides quarterback, I think tight end, to me, is the biggest question mark for Tennessee in this team. Maybe you could also say the depth at inside linebacker, or just linebacker in general, or pass rusher. I think you could argue that might be number one. But on offense, if it's not quarterback, to me, it's what can you do at tight end. And really losing Tim Jordan, too. With that running back room now, you have you have Ty Chandler and you have Eric Gray. But I don't necessarily trust Carlin Fields-Ameed to be, a number 3 guy. It's going to have to be likely a freshman, and I wonder how good. I think T. Hodge will be really good as a blocker. I don't think you have to worry about him too much, having to learn the ropes as a blocker. Because watching his film from high school, he was a really, really good lead blocker. They used him as a fullback and stuff at Maryville. So I think he has potential to be able to play more, because and maybe Leneath Whitehead as well, because he's a bigger guy who you would think both those guys will be able to come in and shouldn't struggle as much with pass blocking and other run blocking duties as a typical freshman would, kind of like Eric Gray did when he first got to Tennessee. But Ben, the question I'll pose to you, and the question I'll pose to our listeners too, to chime in on YouTube or on Twitter as listening to this, with Tennessee now being either right at or right below the scholarship limit now with these transfers and dismissals, should Tennessee go after another player here right before the beginning of fall camp, whether it's a tight end, a running back, or, if you think Tennessee should go after someone else, defensive line or linebacker, is it, in your opinion, too late for Tennessee to go and try and grab someone, or should they? Because I wish this guy was still in the transfer portal, but he's not. But we're going to talk about him in the mailbag actually last week, but then right as we were finishing up the mailbag, he actually committed to a different school. But Central Michigan had a tight end who was a grad transfer come out of there. Then he ended up committing to Virginia, and I think he would have been an interesting person to look at to come in and be in addition to Tennessee's roster. But I don't know who else in the transfer portal. I don't know if there's anyone really that would warrant taking up a spot for this year or next year or anything like that for Tennessee. But in your opinion, Ben, does Tennessee need to go out and look at a tight end, go out and look for a running back, go out and look for any other position you think that depth could be an issue?
They need to go out and look for a tight end. That is the position that they need to go out and find somebody. If somebody could fall into their lap along the defensive line, then absolutely try to bring them in. I think running back, they're set with Eric Gray and Ty Chandler, and then so far so good with T. Hodge. He has impressed early on since stepping foot on campus, so he can potentially be your number 3 back, and Lenith Whitehead and Jabari Small might come along as well. So I think you're fine at the running back position. But if somebody comes open at tight end or along the defensive line, then you need to take a swing at them. And I doubt anybody is in the transfer portal at those 2 positions right now that Jeremy Pruitt would just fall in love with to bring in. But I almost think at the tight end position, you just need to bring in a body with experience, quite frankly. I think anybody would be an upgrade over what Tennessee has right now. That's not the case along the defensive line, because as we went over, you do have guys that can slide in and fill the void of Emmett Gooden. So you don't need to just take a body just to take a body. Only take a body if you feel like they can truly contribute, if they are truly worthy of taking a spot. But at tight end, I think you just need to take a body to take a body, because again, you're relying on 2 redshirt freshmen that really didn't impress much last season. Jacob Warren, who great pass catcher, but how does he stand up in the run game? How does he fare there? And then Princeton Fant, very athletic, but again, he's a tweener, and he's bounced around from position to position. So at tight end, I would just take a body just to take a body, somebody who has played the position, somebody that has experience there, and then hope that they can be adequate enough to produce in the SEC. It stinks, but it just kind of is what it is. With Dominic Wood-Anderson graduating and then the Austin Pope injury, I think they needed to have brought somebody in even to go along with Austin Pope. I mean, there's a reason Tennessee has hit the tight end position so hard in this recruiting cycle with Trinity Bell and Miles Campbell, potentially Rock Taylor. I'm forgetting somebody off the top of my head that can also play tight end. But you've seen Tennessee go after multiple tight ends in this recruiting cycle, and there's a reason why. Hudson Wolf was the other tight end that I was trying to think of, and even that's just for the 2021 class. You look at the 2022 class, and Tennessee has already hit that position hard again, sending out offers to Bennett Christian, a young man out of Ackworth, Georgia, and then most recently Carson Gay, an unranked tight end from Chattanooga. So there's a reason that Tennessee has hit that position hard for this current recruiting cycle and the upcoming recruiting cycle. And to me, it tells me that they are not very confident with what they have at the position currently. So if somebody becomes available at the tight end position, I absolutely take a look at them. And who knows if anybody will come available. But just today in the SEC, we've seen two transfers. Tank Jenkins, an offensive lineman from Texas A&M, he's in the transfer portal. And then Georgia defensive back Devad Wilson, who started 2 games last year, he is in the transfer portal. But unfortunately, they do not play a position of need for Tennessee at the moment. So if somebody presents themselves at the tight end position, I'm absolutely swinging.
While you were talking here, I've been trying to look up and see who else in the transfer portal from tight end. There are some names, but from what I can tell, almost none of the guys who are left that are transferring from schools worth noting have really any playing experience. But as you mentioned, Ben, just to get a body in here, I think you look at Cameron Ory, who played for Texas A&M, he's related to Robert Ory, who played in the NBA. I don't know that he would be immediately eligible, but he put his name in the transfer portal back in December of this year. He was part of the 2017 class for Texas A&M. From what I could see, he hasn't recorded any stats or anything like that while he was at Texas A&M. You have Nick McTeer from San Diego State, who looks like, a guy who could be an option as a 6'4", 220, and Cameron Ory is 6'5", 275, so that's a big body right there. Darian Jones from Colorado is another one who's in the transfer portal. He's 6'6", 245. And then you have guys like Jonathan McCollister from UCF and then Seth Kearns from Wisconsin, who he would be immediately eligible, but he's an interesting case because he came in originally as a safety, played inside linebacker, and then played tight end. So I don't know that you would want to bring him in as a option because it doesn't seem like, from what I could find, that he recorded any offensive stats for Wisconsin. But there doesn't seem to be a ton of options there. But like you said, Ben, I'm almost of the idea of maybe if any of those guys, if you can watch some film on them, if you can watch a Zoom workout or something like that from those guys or of those guys or whatever, I almost think it's worth kicking the tires on it and seeing, because I think there's potential there for Tennessee's tight end group, but I really, outside of maybe Jacob Warren as a pretty good pass catcher, I think, because he was obviously a very good one at Farragut, I don't know that Tennessee has anyone that's really going to be great. And you don't need a tight end to be great to have a good offense. I mean, Jim Chaney has done a good job in the past with tight ends and stuff, but you could have good offenses without a stellar tight end. And maybe Tennessee, they could use Princeton Fan as a blocker, or Sean Brown Jackson Lowe as a blocker. Those guys, they have bigger bodies. Lowe is 6'4", 245. Brown 6'5", 241. But other than that, I mean, you have Warren, who is 6'6", but only 244. He's still not big enough to be, to me, a consistent type of guy. But yeah, I think he's a decent pass-catching option. I don't think Princeton Fant's going to make a huge impact. He hasn't yet. Maybe he finally sticks there and does something. Hunter Salmon, however you say his last name, is a walk-on. And then you have Jordan Allen, the converted linebacker, who is now playing tight end. So that kind of tells you where Tennessee's depth is at tight end, that they've moved Jordan Allen over to that position to try and see if they can get anything out of him there. So I don't know that there's really anybody big, like you said, at a position of need for Tennessee left in the transfer portal. And at this point in the game right now, I mean, obviously fall camp hasn't started yet. There's still people looking for a home. Just listed off several right there, just at tight end. But Tennessee's still waiting to hear back, on is Cade Mays going to be eligible? I think he will, but they're still waiting to hear back on that. They took him as a transfer. They took in Velus Jones Jr. as a transfer. They took in 2 walk-on transfers as well, in Miles Jones, who was a receiver from Nebraska, and I'm blanking on the other guy's name, but he was a specialist, I think a kicker or punter from another school they took in this season.
Brett Graham, punter from Connecticut.
Yeah, thank you, Brett Graham, but he was the other one they took in as a walk-on transfer. So Tennessee, they've gone and grabbed 4 transfers this season. Obviously, 2 of them are going to be walk-ons, at least initially. But they've gone and last offseason grabbed a couple with D'Angelo Gibbs and Robbie Solomon. So it's been this staff's done a pretty good job of going and getting guys to transfer in here. I just don't know that this late in the game that there's going to be a big enough difference maker to go and I wouldn't say waste a spot, but to me the only immediate eligible for sure was that Wisconsin kid, and I don't know that he really warrants a big addition unless you just really feel like he can come in and do something that your other guys can't. Tennessee's going to be very young at tight end, but if tight end is your biggest concern on the team on offense, that's not a bad thing to me. And obviously, like I said earlier, I would say quarterback's still the biggest question mark because you know what you have with Garantano for the most part there. But to me, the quarterback position, and obviously you would agree with this too, Ben, and everyone who watches college football would agree with this, or football in general, quarterback's the most important position. That position, if you don't have it settled, you're not going to be able to reach your potential no matter what else you have. If you have a great offensive line, if you have a great running back, if you have a great wide receiver, your offense is not going to be able to do what it needs to do if your quarterback isn't at least capable enough to not turn the ball over, or not miss wide open guys, not miss the read, to not make a bunch of mistakes. And Garantano showed at times last year he can do that. He can make the correct reads. He can have make good plays. He can be a solid quarterback. But unfortunately for him, I would say more often than the good, he had a lot of bad last season, a lot of mistakes, and a lot of errors that rightfully so garnered a lot of criticism. And I also think unrightfully so garnered some other criticism from some people who are still just not sold on him as the guy. But before this turns into a Jarrett Guarantano, another podcast here, the last time we did a podcast, Ben, we talked about Guarantano and ranking him among the quarterbacks in the SEC. Before that turns into that, I think this will be, unless there's another point you'd like to add, Ben, or someone else you'd want to throw out there or whatever, I think that'd be a good place to end the podcast here. I don't know that Tennessee, I haven't heard any buzz about Tennessee going after anyone in the transfer portal right now in football. I think they were kicking his tires, or at least we're going to, maybe have some interest in that kid from Central Michigan, but then he went to Virginia, and that happened like right after, I think the same day maybe even as the Austin Pope news happened. So that was just kind of, for Tennessee, probably unfortunate timing, but I think that kid maybe, I do not remember his name, but I think he, made a good choice. I think Virginia will be a good school for him to go, play at and whatnot. But Ben, unless there's something else that you would like to add, I think that'll be where we end the podcast here. So is there anything else you would like to say before we end the show?
No, sir. I think we got it all covered. Emmett Gooden, you would prefer to have him on the team, but it is a manageable situation, as is losing Tim Jordan, as is losing Brandon Davis. But with Austin Pope, that is way more concerning, just because of the lack of experience at the position. You do have some upperclassmen in Princeton Fant and Jacob Warren and Jordan Allen, but those three have not played a ton of tight end. Upperclassmen, but haven't played a ton at that position. And again, the two redshirt freshmen haven't really done anything to inspire confidence in anybody. So that position and loss of Austin Pope, and again, we don't know how long Austin Pope is going to be out. I'm assuming that it'll be for the majority of the season, if not the entire season. So that is a position that needs to be addressed, if possible, which led into our second conversation about pursuing a transfer. If you can find somebody at that tight end position, bring them in, because help is needed. And another point that was not made about the tight end position is that it is one of the rare positions on the football field that you don't need to be successful. Auburn doesn't even have tight ends listed on their roster. Tennessee can be okay without having production from the tight end position, but it is a position that Jim Chaney has loved over the years. It could provide a safety blanket for Jarrett Guarantano or Harrison Bailey if he is thrusted into action, or any of the young quarterbacks. It could be a safety blanket for that quarterback. I think the bigger loss is in the running game, not necessarily as pass catchers, because there are numerous receivers that I would rather throw the football to than target a tight end the way the roster is currently constructed. But even, run blocking in those jumbo packages, Jim Chaney, Will Friend, they could bring in extra linemen to line up as tight ends to make up for the loss of Austin Pope in the running game. We saw Cade Mays play the quote tight end position a couple of times at Georgia as a way of getting an extra tackle on the field for Georgia. So I could see Tennessee doing something very similar to offset the loss of Austin Pope in the running game. But Austin Pope is without a doubt the biggest loss of the recent attrition that has kind of come to fruition over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I was going to add to there, I think Pope, mentioned earlier, I think where it's the biggest loss for him and Tennessee is going to be in the run game, not necessarily in the passing game. And I think Tennessee, like I said, I think they have a good option as a pass catcher at tight end with Jacob Warren. It's just a matter of, does he have what it takes to be a blocker? Can he hold up an SEC play consistently? I think Pope is going to be, his absence, however long he's going to be out, and again, assuming the season goes as planned here, his absence is going to be felt the most when Tennessee, has a power run play or is at the goal line, and I think Princeton Fant could be serviceable there. I wonder about Jordan Allen or one of the redshirt freshmen on Lowen Brown, but I think that's obviously where you're going to feel Pope's absence the most. But that'll wrap it up here for this episode of the RTI Podcast. We really appreciate you guys tuning in to this episode. If you have any questions, leave a comment on the YouTube video or find us on Twitter at Rocky Top Insider and leave us a question or comment there. Until next time, this has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.